Welcome to the Legacy LaunchPod, where we help families build and scale their online business to the six-figure mark and beyond so they can break the poverty cycle, build generational wealth, and make a huge impact in the kingdom of God. It all starts right here. It's been a few days. It was pouring rain. It was not nice. I have felt cooped up, and I feel like my legs are going to fall off of my body because I have not moved them enough. So here we are outside and getting some fresh air, and we're also preparing for a little weekend away as I record this. And then shortly after that, we're heading on to a family holiday, which has been planned for most of the year, actually. And then we thought we were going to call it off because of a big event that was happening in our business. And now it's back on because the event got moved. So I can't talk about the event. That's the event that shall not be named just yet. I'm waiting eagerly to be able to talk to you guys all about it because it's pretty exciting. But in the meantime, thought I would answer a question of the day. Someone asked, do you use any pre-made curriculum as a general guide? And yeah, the answer is I have over the years. We have never really gone all in on one particular type of curriculum. I would say we're leaning more onto the classical side of education, but we loved the Veritas Press history courses and their Bible courses. And I pretty much got all the kids on their phonics programs. So they have this whole history museum set with all the little books and all the little workbooks and everything. And those worked fantastic. All five of my kids learned to read perfectly. We selected different types of curriculum based on the year, based on our needs, based on how much work was it for the parent. And because that's always a factor, right? The idea here, though, when people ask me this kind of question, I just think, listen, there's tons of amazing resources out there on the internet that are probably a lot better than me. I can tell you what I've done, but that doesn't mean that's what you should do. And that doesn't mean that I'm an expert. I have homeschooled for the last, I will say 18 years, right? Since they've been born. They've been home and they've been learning. Therefore, any kind of learning is schooling, right? So I've been doing this for 18 years, but that doesn't make me an expert. I gravitated to certain things and they worked for our family. Every year, there's more and more curriculum coming out. It's almost overwhelming. There's a sea of great stuff out there. So if I was starting from scratch, I wouldn't know where to begin because there's so much great stuff. So this is what happens is people they like something and then they stick with it usually because it's working for them. And there's just so many darn options out there. With that said, Veritas is one that we loved. We always did most of their online self-paced courses. This year, one of our kids is doing a live class. And so that's a first. And that's quite nice as well. Keeps them really accountable. So I like that. And then other years, we've had a really, really laid back year. It was a year that we were traveling a lot or a year that we were just needed a break. So that was something we did quite often. Then a lot of stuff we just made up ourselves, right? So like I said, my morning time, that would include reading aloud from stuff, a lot of discussions, a lot of family discussions. And in our family, all topics are on the table. So we don't really hide our kids away. We don't create like a bubble in terms of, we don't talk about certain topics. Well, they are not of the world, but they're in it. And so they've got to learn how to think. And that's the key, how to think, not what to think, but how to think biblically through the lens that Christ wants us to look through. And so that requires teaching discernment from a young age and not shielding them from it altogether. Obviously, keep things age appropriate to a degree, but let's not forget that the Bible is R-rated. And so we don't give them they've had children's Bibles, but that's not our go-to, right? They're cute, nice illustrations, all that stuff, but the Bible is R-rated. So if it's in the Word of God, we don't need to shield it from them. So that's been our modus operandus. And same, that's our same philosophy at church. Our kids, nothing against Sunday school. We never put them in it. We just always had them with us in the service. And even as babies, even as toddlers, they would just, keep their little hands occupied. Yay for snacks. Yay for, pens and crayons. And they would just learn to absorb and sit. And I just think that when kids are immersed like that, they're absorbing way more than we know. And
We can have quite sophisticated conversations with our almost 10-year-old son, who's our youngest. And that's because we didn't dumb things down. We didn't make things all age appropriate for a 5-year-old. We didn't send them to little camps where all they do is color sheep and glue stuff on popsicle sticks. Again, nothing wrong with crafts, but it's about raising the standard a little bit while also making it relaxed and not a stressful environment. So, how do you do that? I think it's not, eh, let's just put it this way, more is caught than taught. So, it's not what you say, it's what you do. And it's what you're doing as a parent in your own household that is setting the standard because they're watching and they're observing. And so the standard is really set by how you're living your life and what you're doing in your daily activity. That's really where it's at. So, I know that kind of went off from curriculum, but to me, all of life is a curriculum, right? We can learn about certain topics and we can try to box them up into neat and tidy little segments of the day. But that's not really how we learn in life in general. So I try to think about it a little bit more holistically, a little more immersively, because that's how adults operate. You could have a fairly sophisticated conversation with our 10-year-old about most topics, right? He might not be an expert on all things, that's for sure, but he can hold a conversation. And that was the case with all of our kids, actually. And, they're still forming their own thoughts and their own opinions over time. We've got 4 teenagers now. But the point is that they're not intimidated. They don't look at you like you have two heads if you want to talk about macroeconomics or something, right? Or if you want to talk about inflation, they all know what inflation is, right? They all know, especially certain big concepts like tyranny. When we have 5-year-olds, they know exactly what tyranny means. Whoever's walking on this path is going to get some interesting commentary. But they knew from the youngest age, like some of these bigger concepts of freedom versus tyranny and just some bigger, you talk about history and that opens up the conversation and what's happening today. And, it's not that difficult to create an integrated life. This has been the last 20 years for us is a fully integrated life between business, family, faith, and the whole 9 yards. It's all mushed into one. And on that note, here's what I'd like to talk about in this episode. And this always happens to me. I start on one thing and then it inspires me to talk about the next thing. And Steve will have some thoughts on this, but I'd like to talk about the myth of balance and the myth of work-life balance. Right out of the gate, I just want to say what I'm not saying is that you should work 24/7. Because as we talked about in a previous episode, there's actually a biblical model for the rhythm of work, which is the Bible says 6 days a week you shall work, seventh you should rest. When we're in modern times, how does that apply, right? And what is this whole emphasis on work-life balance? I believe that this came about because of perhaps an epidemic stemming from the hustle culture where there's an epidemic of burnout, right? We've all got different definitions. And a lot of times burnout is actually just an emotional feeling in the moment where you feel tired, you feel fatigued. And I think that there's like clinical burnout, right? Where something happened to your adrenals, like legit, and you're in the hospital. So that I think is more of a clinical medical definition of burnout. But if you're just talking about, I've been doing too much, I've been thinking nonstop, and usually it's associated with a stressful state of mind. And I have read a few books on this now about stress. And here's what's so interesting to me now. I'm naturally prone to be a little more stressed out. Like I'm not naturally really laid back. So this is something that I've been working on for a long time. So this will give you some hope. The biggest harm that comes from stress is not actually the stress. It is the perceived emotion. It is the perceived stress, and that the stress is negative and it's bad for you and harmful and dangerous. Now, that kind of blew my mind. So I actually read a book. It was called The Upside of Stress. I think that's what it's called. We'll link to the show notes. The Upside of Stress was one, and it just kind of blew my mind. And it was like, it's one thing if it's the kind of physical stress where you're running a marathon every other month. That kind of physical stress will break your body down. But the kind of stress that most people experience on a day-to-day basis, the emotional bills, all that kind of thing, These are normal things. There's a lot of arguments being made right now that we have a more stressful life than ever. Well, at the same time, it's never been easier to make money. It's never been easier to raise your, jump up on the ladder. And there's so much ease and convenience and medication and all of that. So how are they both true at the same time? And this book really pointed out for me about it's not the stress, it's the perception of stress. If you have a prolonged chronic perception that the stress, the life you're experiencing is so bad for you and it's dangerous and harmful and you're going to have a heart attack if this doesn't stop and all of this, that's actually going to make it true. So essentially, they're proving through data that your beliefs about reality and your current experience create a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I found that to be so interesting. And this book is filled with science, right? It's like, here's all the studies. We evaluated people from all over the world for decades, and this is what the science shows. And so that has given me a whole new perspective on when I feel like I'm going through a hard time. And hey, I'll let myself feel bad for 5 minutes. I'll have a cry or I'll be grumpy or whatever for a bit, but I don't let myself stay there because we're human, right? I've had this issue where I thought, wow, things are just so stressful all the time. And let's not kid ourselves. Being a business owner, there's a higher level of stress, you could say, because there's responsibility, right? No one is taking care of you. No one, right? It's you and you alone. You're the one making payroll. You're the one hiring. You're the one who has to live with the systems you created or the lack of systems that you did not create that are now making a mess. And ultimately, it's all on you. So that by the very fact of having more responsibility, you can make a strong argument that there's more stress. I agree with that. But is the stress actually bad for you? Or are we just perceiving it that way? And I think that sometimes my tendency, because I'm like a first generation entrepreneur, my tendency is to be viewing those things through the lens of this is bad for me. And I think that that's been a big mistake. And that has led to the self-fulfilling prophecy of burnout. And so then what happens when you hit burnout? When you hit burnout, for me, I definitely have, the saying is a canary in the coal mine. And everybody, it's like, what's your tell, right? So usually there's a physical manifestation. I struggle with sleep a lot. I get heart palpitations, things like that, just anxiety type symptoms. And sometimes they happen even whenever I feel fine. I feel like everything's fine. Life is good. What's going on? And so it just is more of a you know, an alarm bell for me to pause and look at, hey, is there something deeper going on? Right. And so, you're going to have your tell too. So when you feel like you've been overdoing it, it doesn't mean stop altogether or quit. You might just need to modify a few things for a period of time. So usually the first thing for me is I've got to get more sleep because I've not been a good sleeper for a long time now. I just tend to wake up a lot of wake ups. Sometimes it's trouble falling asleep or staying asleep or just not enough hours. So I've got to prioritize it. And that means I have to sacrifice other things that I don't want to sacrifice, like time with my family or going to bed early. I'm like, no, if I could, I would never go to sleep because I'm excited about life. And there's so many amazing things to see and do and projects. And I'm just excited for life. So I've got to prioritize that. And you probably already know in your mind right now, what's the thing you need to prioritize to get back to feeling a little better. But I would definitely recommend you read that book, The Upside of Stress. And there's a few others out there like it. It's going to change your perspective. Now we come back to talking about work-life balance. I couldn't bring that topic up without first addressing burnout and the perception of burnout. And that, hey, you can just take little breaks. You can modify a few things and continue. It doesn't mean you need to quit or that you shouldn't be doing what you're doing at all. So now when we talk about work-life balance with that perspective in mind, I can offer a few tips, and then I think Steve has a couple of ideas and thoughts as well. But I would say some of the things just come down to design, right? So what does work-life balance even mean? To me, there's not really a balance because we're living a fully integrated life. And that means in our family, just how we have it set up, everybody's together all the time. So that means we're working in the same room or household or floor of our house. School's happening at the same time. Meals are all happening at the same time. Coffee refills are happening a dozen times a day. And Yeah, there's live classes. We're jumping on Zoom. We're taking a walk. We're walking the dog. We are running to the grocery store. It's all happening all in one day at one time. There's no real separation of this is school time. Now this is work time. Now it's the weekend. Stuff is happening 7 days a week. And so, how do you create a work life balance? It's not really even there. It's just a mishmash. You might think that sounds amazing or that sounds terrible. I don't really know because this is just how we do it in our family. Not saying it's the best way, but that's what works for us. As you heard a couple episodes ago about time management, I say it's a mishmash, but it's an organized mishmash, right? So it's not complete chaos, but it is very, I don't know a better word other than to say it's integrated. Steve, what are your thoughts on work life balance? And when someone says, I don't know how I can do it all and I don't know how to balance everything, to you, is balance a complete myth?
I think our perception of what that actually means is a myth because I think a lot of us, most of us, and speaking from my own experience or inexperience in the past, you say a term like that and you don't even really understand what you're saying. Oh, yeah, work life balance. That's what I strive for without even understanding what that even is. And I don't think it's the same for every person or every family. I think it depends on, what are your goals? What's your mission? What are your values? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to achieve? How are you raising your kids? What's important to you? What's not important to you? And how do you fit all of that into your life? That's balance for you. So, like you said, for us, everything is integrated.
How do you know if something is out of balance?
I think when things are out of balance for you, you will probably be, I know for me, I'm a lot more irritable. I have a shorter fuse
Mhm.
than I do typically. I'm usually an easygoing kind of guy. But when I am out of balance for myself, it's when I'm neglecting my health a little bit more, relationships, my wife, my children, with God. And I have put too much emphasis or too much focus in other areas that don't actually bring fulfillment.
And are you saying those are the results of you being out of balance or the cause of being out of balance?
The result of having the wrong focus is what brings the lack of balance.
Okay, and for you, because it's gonna be different for everyone, like what's the cause of getting out of focus? How does that even happen?
I think it's when you lose sight of what's actually important. And for me,
Oh, I know what it is.
that can happen when I become over focused in one area.
Yeah. And for me, and I think for both of us actually, we can often get sucked into the urgent.
Oh, yes.
That pulls you right out of whack. And sometimes the urgent can take over everything
Yep.
and pull you into a spiral of nothing else matters right now except this urgent problem that either, it's either a quick solve, like the fire to put out in the business, or something bigger like a family crisis or something going on. And that can really throw you off balance for sure.
Or even somebody else's problem that has become your urgency,
Right.
right?
Somehow it landed on your plate.
Yeah. So all of that is what I mean when I say the focus has shifted to an area that is not in alignment with where I want to go.
Yeah. So getting back into balance, how do we do that?
You got to readjust and like pause and go, okay, where I just want to be right now. What's important and how do I adjust?
It's like a recalibration.
Yep.
And what would be good, a good suggestion, I think, is a weekly time to reflect, right? Whether that's writing in a journal or just planning your week, right? When you go to plan your
Yeah.
week, if you use a day timer or Google Calendar or anything like that, that's the perfect time to kind of sit and reflect about, okay, what took over my whole entire week that I was not planning for? And how do I get back on track? And how do I make sure I'm focused on the important things and not just urgent things?
Mm-hmm.
Are always going to demand your attention, but aren't always important. So, that
Yep.
for everybody, if you're not aware, go look this up. It's called the Eisenhower Matrix. There are YouTube videos about it. I've got a blog post actually on my website. So, if you go to leahmchenry.com and go to my blog, I wrote an article about the Eisenhower Matrix and how to help you differentiate between The urgent versus the important. Through that process, you actually go through a little decision matrix of what to do about those things. Once you identify them, should you continue what you're doing? Should you delegate? Should you delete them? Should you delay doing them, defer them? So that's a really helpful blog post. You'll find that on my website. Link to that in the show notes. I think we'll have to continue this conversation because we're at the end of our walk now. These are meant to be conversations. We're not the world's experts on every single topic. We don't always have it all figured out, but we can share our journey. We can share with you what we've learned, any wisdom, and hopefully you feel like you found some new friends as well. So that's it for today. Hope you found that helpful. We'll see you next time.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning in today. Don't leave just yet. I've got 2 things. Number 1, if you enjoyed this content, if this was of any value to you, please leave me a review and share with a friend. This content is 100% free, so that's like leaving me a tip, and it's going to encourage us to keep making it. Number 2, if it's your desire to build your own family legacy and you want some help, send me a DM on Instagram with the word podcast, and I've got something special for you. Again, DM me with the word podcast at Real Leah McHenry on Instagram. We'll see you next time.